On now. All right, welcome to yet another session of 9 p.m. Conversations. This is me, Prashant, and I have Lokesh with me. Hi, Lokesh.
Hi
Welcome
Prashant,
again to yet
thanks.
another session.
Yet
And
another. Totally.
yeah, so
Mhm.
last time, I'll quickly summarize our conversations yesterday. Yesterday, we looked at Ramayan and came up with very interesting ideas about how Ramayan could essentially have been about denial of access to technology versus making that technology accessible to everybody. We saw how Lanka, an island, was very rich, how inhabitants of Lanka were capable of making quick ingress and then exit very fast from wherever they raided the ashrams. And then we
Mhm.
also saw how Ram and his army had difficulty in crossing the ocean. So a
Yeah.
lot of those things, and we sort of came up with this hypothesis, which I would say
Mhm.
very interesting hypothesis, that Ramayana could essentially have been about shipping technology, and Ramraj could have meant that shipping technology became available for everybody, and the income started increasing, prosperity started coming out.
Yeah.
In continuation, we
So
we started
let's
off.
just
Yes,
let's just hold it here, and I have a couple of comments to make
yes,
there.
please.
So
Yeah.
what it also gives is a very interesting thing. So if this hypothesis has any grain of truth in it, what it also
Mm-hmm.
tells us is a couple of things. One, that evil can come out of monopoly and monopolies of technology. So this is not evil in this classical sense that we understand that word.
Uh huh.
So there are a couple of actions by Ravan which are which can be called evil, but in our interpretation, the core evil that the Ramayana seems to focus on is something that normally would be hard pressed to even term as something like evil.
Uh huh.
So that's something which I felt after yesterday's conversation was a fairly interesting angle to it,
Mm-hmm.
and the
Yes, in
fact
fact,
that
in fact, I had a lot of difficulty in coming around this idea that how could denial of technology be considered as such a big evil?
hmm, and what did you any thoughts that you got on that, or how did you think about it?
I in fact pointed that out to you, and
Hmm.
then we sort of did touch upon how even with the research that happens or the new innovations that happen, there
Hmm.
is a regime which on one hand ensures that the innovators get their due benefit and the advantage and monetary returns for
Hmm.
the enterprise, the risk that they take in investing for the innovation, while
Hmm.
on the other hand ensuring that the technology access is not limited, is not exclusive, and it is
Is
made
more
available
universal.
for
So
everybody,
there is
more
this
universal.
benefit paradigm, yet universality is kind of minted. That's the framework we largely come across.
Yes, yes. One thing very amazing is that the technology and we, I mean, today we use a lot of high technology, something things which were not accessible 10 years ago,
Hmm.
and for some interesting reason, the access to that technology is not exclusive. I mean, even somebody who's very low on the social rung or the economic ladder is able to access that technology. Now, that is not to say that there would not be technology which is limited or access barred through money or affordability and things like that. But then
Hmm.
there is a way through which the technology seeps down.
I'll give you another angle to it probably, and maybe it's a good angle or a bad angle. If you remember a few years ago, the cryogenic engines or these things
Uh-huh.
were not being so. India was not being able to import it, and probably as youngsters and younger than today people, we thought probably it was not a good idea that you're trying to push India down. You're trying to do it. So just keep those contexts in mind. Similarly,
Hmm.
not giving mobile access to people would kind of seem evil.
Or, for example, in today's context, some country or some company develops a corona vaccine. and they don't make it
So
available for
vaccine is
people.
probably a very corner case because there is a direct correlation with death, and so I'll for a minute park it. It's not a very generic term. Here we are talking about
Hmm.
more like a business aspect. So I'll probably
Hmm.
segregate the two rather than generalize for
Okay.
corona.
Okay.
So one was this very interesting idea that technology and monopolizing technology could be evil.
Hmm.
Second, that even a religious, so Ramayana is one of our most preeminent religious epics and books. If this hypothesis has any element of truth in it, is trying to tackle that kind of a problem.
Hmm.
So the kind of importance being given to these kind of issues, you would imagine that religion, what has religion to do with it,
Hmm.
or what has society to do with it? Most of technologies are largely business issues.
Largely business.
So what probably, in a sense, what Ramayana is hinting at is that these things are intertwined
Hmm.
and they have implications. One affects the other, and the other affects the other part, and these have a lot of causalities built into them,
Hmm. Okay.
which gives us probably a very different way to look and read at the Ramayana. So it is to that
Hmm.
extent that evil is done, that Ravan and those are become Rakshasas, which in our term is, so the whole set of people, or that whole tribe or clan or whatever we want to call it, is gets an evil connotation. So it's to that
Hmm.
extent that we have made it
Hmm.
black and white. So it just gives us the extent of the impact of these things. So one way to
Hmm.
also look at the Ramayana is that monopoly and technology and evil, two things that we would have thought have no correlation with each other, could have such overlaps,
Hmm.
and the implications of these could be that a clan of people could, the whole clan could be termed evil.
So we are saying that evil does not necessarily have to mean uh, killing somebody or stealing somebody's money, but evil could
That seems
also
to be the
stem.
interpretation, if we can make it
Evil
out that way.
evil could also stem from second or third order effects of things which look at least at the first glance, things which look extremely unrelated, like monopoly, technology, and evil.
And we saw that again in the example of the Mahabharata before that, that wherein succession and chaos around succession finally starts becoming some form of evil.
Mm-hmm.
So in a more generic way, something could be evil, which is, and if we take a more generic definition, something that adversely affects people
Uh-huh.
would be evil. And what we're seeing in both these cases, there are strong adverse effects.
Mm-hmm.
They're not direct consequences. The causality, the action and the reaction, and the action and the outcome is not easy to establish in an instant,
Mm-hmm.
but there is this effect here. Finally it has an adverse effect,
Mm-hmm.
and hence if you look at it from that framework, and there are obviously in these systems, in these processes, there are the second order, the third order, the fourth order effects, because these things have longevity and they have implications over periods of time,
Over a period of time.
over a period of time. So in that context, when we look at it,
Mm-hmm.
it gives us a very different way to look at things. And today, when
Mm-hmm.
we look at maybe our regulations, our this, our laws, we try and look at those aspects of it. A law which was made maybe 50 years ago or 30 years ago, we're trying to look at its implications, and so we're thinking about those frameworks.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not something that is alien to us. We see that in businesses, we see the impacts, and maybe in the series we'll probably look at some other pieces and how these technologies have affected them over years and years and maybe even centuries.
Mm-hmm.
So their implications are strong, and those
Implications are
implications
strong. Yeah, implications are strong, implications are long term, and implications may not be directly obvious.
may not be direct. In most cases, the more of these systems that we look at least my hypothesis or my guess would be that the implications are not that obvious. This
Mm-hmm.
is not a direct. cause and effect relationship.
Mm-hmm.
There is nothing of that sort. These are far more complex, and they play out over a period of time. Today,
Mm-hmm.
when we look at a lot of things, so even if we look at today's science, a lot of things are built on top of each other. So there are building blocks. Similarly, if you look at these first order, second order, third order effects as building blocks, so obviously it takes time for these things to play out.
Mm-hmm.
So there's nothing different happening here. It's just that
Mm-hmm.
probably we look at it because of the vocabulary we use, which is good, evil, war, battle.
Mm-hmm.
The vocabulary is constructed in today's context, and the connotations and the meanings and the emotions it has with it. So it
And
could also.
obviously, yeah, obviously, always at all times. And one thing is that the vocabulary, the meanings of specific words takes a specific connotation as per the context. The other thing also is that at any point of time in human history, it would have been very easy to look at the direct implications, whereas the second or third order effects are generally hidden. Sometimes we wouldn't even be able to sort of correlate or connect them back to the actual factor causing that, and we
Absolutely.
could just be seeing the effects.
Yeah. So that's a small detour we have done. And if we can now come back to the question that we started with, which was monarchy and all of that, before we took a detour into the Mahabharata and the
Mm-hmm.
Ramayana. So, couple of things that we probably saw in the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. If we start with the Mahabharata, we looked at how they had probably enunciated a system of stability and then a law of succession,
Mm-hmm.
and wherein chaos and succession led to the Great War.
Chaos and succession led to the Great War.
Second thing that we saw both in the Ramayana and the Mahabharata is that they're probably talking about the larger systems. They're not talking of governance and the citizen rights and the welfare of citizens and a welfare state. Nothing of that sort. There
Mm-hmm.
seems to be an implicit assumption that if we keep the systems robust and healthy, there will be a lot of goodness that will come out of it. A lot of good that will come out of it.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
so which in some sense is aligned to the assumption that we made that a system is required rather than chaos.
Uh-huh.
So the assumption we had made was systems are required, and more often than not, having a system would outperform having no systems.
Having a
Keeping
system
that
would be better
system the
than.
way, whichever way. Second, these systems have been evolutionary; they got evolved. It was not that some fine day a guy stood up and said, "Okay, this is the way it should work," and we all implemented
Mm-hmm.
it. So
Mm-hmm.
evolution means that there is a lot of selection that's gone into it. A lot of natural selection is built into it. So on the average, it will typically outperform the no system. There will obviously be those extreme edge cases where there will be issues, and there could be solutions that will be built around them. But on the average,
So,
it will
so,
outperform.
so what we
So
are saying is that having a system is better than not having a system, and if there are any issues with the system, they'll probably be taken care of by the evolutionary cycle, and the system will keep on getting sharpened and chipped off the edges and further
which
refined
does not
as
mean
time
there
goes
will be
on.
no edges. So, like we saw in the
Which does not
Holocaust
mean there'll be.
in Nazi
Uh huh.
Germany, it does not mean it cannot or will not have edges. It
Mm-hmm.
does not mean that. It just means that the probability of being on the edge is lower because it's an edge case, but it does not mean not having an edge case.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first assumption we made. The second hypothesis we made, that this winning system or the system that emerged as the most dominant system in those times was monarchy. And the two key tenets of monarchy was, first, that the king is a king for life.
Mm-hmm.
There are two large change events. Either the king
Mm-hmm.
dies or the king gets dethroned. The king dies is what we term as succession. And the king getting dethroned is largely a construct that we call as war.
War.
So it
Mm-hmm.
could be an internal revolt, external revolt, whatever, but we're calling it in a more generic construct. So in that context, when we look at it, wars necessarily are not necessarily, if I can use the
Evil.
word, evil.
Mm-hmm.
They could be costly. They could lead to a lot of
Mm-hmm.
human destruction. But if we take a systemic view of it, so the systemic view could be different from the individual view.
Mm-hmm.
So an example, and maybe not a great example, is suppose a country is invaded.
Mm-hmm.
The other army fights back. There is human casualty, but we celebrate the patriotism, the nationalism, the effort goes in, and we have all these tales that we do and these heroic tales that come out of it. So from a systemic
Mm-hmm.
level, we are saying fight back. That's good for
Uh-huh.
the overall good. So
Mm-hmm.
just not having violence or being zero violence does not mean systemic good.
Uh-huh.
Nowhere is
Mm-hmm.
that very clear. Yeah, overall, can the system reduce violence as one of the tools? That's obviously a great idea if we can keep on doing it. And what we will probably realize in the course of these discussions is that probably that's the angle, that's the direction we are going towards.
Mm-hmm.
So coming back, the war as a tool, as an instrument, was probably one of the most chosen instruments, because succession
Mm-hmm.
was not really a chosen instrument. War was really the change agent, if we call it, and which is why we're calling it as a chosen tool or instrument.
Mm-hmm.
So if monarchy was the chosen model, then in some sense war was the chosen tool or
So
chosen change agent.
if we sort of try to put it in today's vocabulary, I think what we are saying is that war obviously had costs. So war was something which had a first order negative effects, but the second order benefits ensured that the system stayed stable.
And maybe even this is a modern connotation wherein we have moved extremely away from violence, wherein we look at that violence as very negative. Maybe that
Uh-huh.
wasn't the view at that point in time.
Okay.
Was that a correct view or an incorrect view? I think so. That is a separate question.
Mm-hmm.
So this is again a very today's interpretation of it.
Mm-hmm.
So
True.
war had a process.
Uh-huh.
The process had human costs. These are facts. Now,
Mm-hmm.
how do you look at them? How do you could be very contextual.
Okay.
Okay, so this is what we are saying. So
Mm-hmm.
what this probably helps us make the next maybe hypothesis that if wars were the chosen instrument, in some sense they were again the selected instruments because these were all evolutionary.
Mm-hmm.
And by selection, we would typically mean that they had probably a lot of efficiency or a lot of good characteristics built into them.
Mm-hmm.
So why were wars efficient?
Uh-huh.
And why? And this is probably a question that has probably been asked a lot of times in modern times is why have wars disappeared? Today, when we look at it,
Mm-hmm.
largely speaking, the kind of wars that we've seen in history,
Mm-hmm.
their propensity, their frequency, everything has reduced by several orders.
Several orders.
Why has that happened?
Uh-huh.
And let's make a simple argument and let's see if we can build on it that wars stopped being efficient. So, if wars were efficient earlier, and which is why they were the chosen instrument, they have stopped
Mm-hmm.
being efficient.
Okay.
Okay. And
Okay.
let's for
Makes
a
sense.
minute go back to the Ramayana and the Mahabharata to look at efficiency for a minute.
Uh-huh.
So, if we look at the Ramayana, there is this change of regime in Kishkinda,
Mm-hmm.
wherein Bali has actually been portrayed as a slightly more aggressive and maybe in that sense a slightly negative character. The change and that was violence, so that can be termed as a war. The king got
Mm-hmm.
dethroned, but it was a single arrow, a single incident, so it could be as efficient as that.
Uh-huh. So
We see
one
it this
arrow implementing the regime change instead of what we, yeah, I mean that
typically
would be a bad
the
example.
popular connotation.
Uh-huh.
think about the Mahabharata. Jarasandha,
Uh, uh-huh.
who's the guy who's made so many kings prisoners and is the king of Magad and has like and will sacrifice when he has 100 kings as prisoners. Again, it's a duel between Jarasandha and Bhim. It's a duel that goes on for days, but it's a duel. And at the end of it, Bhim kills Jarasandha, and at the end of it, Jarasandha's son, which is the succession part of it, is crowned
Mm-hmm.
king. But the problem gets resolved because the problem was, in some sense, the individual and his or her thought processes and policies and frameworks that were the issue. In some sense, that's
Mm-hmm.
what is being hinted at in the case of Bali and Jarasandha. So the
Mm-hmm.
regime change became absolute. So we are seeing these
Mm-hmm.
kind of cases. The
Mm-hmm.
other extremes, we are seeing the war in Lanka, in the case of Ramayana, and the 18-day war in the case of Mahabharata, which led to huge amounts of destruction. So these are the extremes we are talking about.
So Lokesh, one question that comes up. Uh, Obviously, a war like Bhim Jarasandh or a battle like Sugriv and Bali, to actually have these kind of battles would probably have required a lot of structures or frameworks in place where a king, even when he is getting defeated in a duel, he would not call on his entire army to start fighting.
So we would see those kind of stuff. So one, we need to remember that in ancient times, most of the times it was kings who led their forces in battle. Today it's very hard to understand. Alexander was famous for leading his men into army, and he's
But
famously ascribed with that comment that I will not take you through any danger that I myself don't face first.
perfect, perfect. But there still is a fundamental difference between a king leading his entire army into battle. Uh,
Obviously, there's a
on the
difference.
other hand, we have a king who's dueling. He would obviously, the losing king would obviously after some time know that, okay, probably I'm going to lose. So then he
Mhm.
has to resist the temptation of inviting or calling or commanding all his army to start attacking the guy who's hitting him.
Mhm. So,
So
so
that would
again,
have
there could be a lot of processes. Even in if you look at the Greek Roman histories, the Battle of Troy, we see
mhm,
the duel between Hector and Achilles.
mhm,
So that construct does exist. And
uh-huh.
if you go back, really back, wherein probably armies were much smaller and the battles were more one on one, maybe that is the evolution of a construct.
And it's not too difficult to imagine. I mean, if you start having the value system where a king's individual glory is very important and a brave king is supposed to be the one who would not leave a challenge unanswered, and if it is a challenge for a duel, you have to fight a duel and not call your entire army. In that kind of a value system, in that kind of a structure, a king who probably played foul and called his entire army probably would face a lot of ridicule, and those things would be weeded out.
Yeah, and we have those kind of anecdotes or those phrases that it's better to die in the battle
Mm-hmm.
than live with shame and live with dishonor. An honorable death is far more preferable than this. And then again, religion and the priests and the culture would come in that the death would be celebrated, and an honorable death, going back to our framework of life being a limitless thing. This is just the one
Mm-hmm.
part of that journey. So you get access to all those riches. The gods would shower roses
Mm-hmm.
on you and flowers on you. So there are a lot of constructs, and you're absolutely right, which probably led to these things.
Mm-hmm.
And it's probably likely that there were probably some instances of these, but over a
Mm-hmm.
period of time, this probably, maybe we don't see them that prominent in recorded history.
Mm-hmm.
But what we see prominent in recorded history, and let's come back to another question here. Most of
Mm-hmm.
the historical battles, if you look at most history is two armies facing each other in an open ground.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one common construct. The other common construct which started coming probably more in the last couple of millennia is when you surround a castle or a fort and you lay siege to it.
Mm-hmm.
So two very very common constructs there. Now,
Mm-hmm.
why do you fight in an open ground?
Mm-hmm.
When the
Mm-hmm.
cities are somewhere else, people are somewhere else, business and trade is somewhere else,
Uh-huh.
and you're really not fighting on the boundary of the city or in most cases you march to an open ground and you fight there.
Mm-hmm.
Why was that the
Just to make
construct?
it efficient. You're saying to make it efficient, to minimize destruction.
No. So that was
Hmm.
an outcome of it. So probably the
Okay.
reason it happened was, and we had a different set of people who were fighting. So you
Uh-huh.
collected an army, maybe from the peasants, the farmers, went into a fight, and you solved it. The normal it's only when we come to the cities and the walled cities do we see of sacking and all that, and that too in a few instances. And typically the earlier sackings were looked down upon.
Mm-hmm.
The war
Mm-hmm.
was limited to the armies.
Oh, we saw that very beautifully in Game of Thrones. Sacking a city is considered very, very reprehensible, whereas the honorable thing for the armies is to come out in the open and fight.
Come out in the so that was this is exactly the construct we had. So you fight it
Uh-huh.
out, you do it. There is this professional set of quasi professionals led by professionals, and then you amass those forces from the common folks or the peasants or the farmers and the blacksmiths and the other guys,
Mm-hmm.
and you fight. Life, the rest of the life goes on as it is.
Mm-hmm.
So in that sense, the effect of it was to a very small part of the population. So that is the first
Mm-hmm.
efficiency, which is very different from the constructs we see today, or in the Second World War, wherein London was bombed, or Pearl Harbor was there, or Dresden was bombed, or cities were looted, and which is a different construct.
Mm-hmm.
So you went on. These things also started to change when we had the sieges of the walled cities and the forts, and then they were kind of sacked. There are enough instances of it, but this is the evolution that we see it. There
Mm-hmm.
are there are narrations in history which tell us that the armies are fighting and the farmers are tilling their land or
Mm-hmm.
just at the sides. So in some sense, a demarcation of these two, which said, okay, this is fighting. In some sense, the Mahabharata again says these are the guys who will fight. They will fight.
Mm-hmm.
This is the chosen. There are these laws of engagement. Follow them, and rest of you carry on with your lives. It has really
Mm-hmm.
nothing to do with you. In some sense, that's the message in the Mahabharata.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm. The
Uh-huh. Makes
second
sense.
thing, the second thing is that the dominant activity of those times was agriculture.
Mm-hmm.
The most of the establishments, the houses were what we would call made of mud and some bricks and some stones and thatch and all those things, and there were not too much investment going into them.
Mm-hmm.
Most of your production was agricultural production, the livestock, the water you get from the rivers and the ponds. There wasn't too much of infrastructure, so
Lokesh,
destruction.
is it right to say that investment was low? Because maybe from that context, from their time's perspective, the investment probably was not low, A, and maybe the reason was that maybe the resources like we talked about, agriculture would renew itself after 3 4 months.
Mhm.
So maybe low destruction or renewability of those resources was a more prominent factor than investment.
No, so another notion that we have of those times is sacking the treasury or the king's
Uh-huh.
jewels. So that is where the resources were, and the rest of the
Mm-hmm.
resources were scattered out. So they were not consolidated into a single thing. So
Mm-hmm.
land is a very extremely important resource. Your grains are
Mm-hmm.
an extremely important resource. The livestock are a very important resource, but they are very scattered in nature.
Mm-hmm.
And if you start trying to, as we've discussed, if you start trying to probably destroy those resources, one, it will take a lot of time and effort, and it may not be viable. And second,
Uh-huh.
in most cases, at least in the case of land and agriculture, it would the staple crops, the cereals and the other things, and the vegetables would regenerate in maybe 3 to 4 months or 5 months. So all
Mm-hmm.
we are looking at is this period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And in that period of time, with the weapons you had at your this and those safety issues and all that, you also the armies or the fighting armies or that army which is destroying these things would also have to defend itself. Again, it does not have those establishments, it does not have those things, it has to live off
Mm-hmm.
these grounds. So keep that construct in mind.
Uh-huh.
Hmm? So the argument we are making is that in most cases these resources were distributed enough. We
Mm-hmm.
segregated people who were fighting to some extent,
Mm-hmm.
and hence it was more important to do a direct battle than destroy these resources.
Uh-huh.
So there was an angle of efficiency that came in. Now efficiency seems very
Mm-hmm.
very a bad choice of a word when we're talking about wars,
About
but this
war.
this is but this would be more relative to what we would see probably if we talk about a post-industrial area. If we talk of today, so you need all your
Mm-hmm.
refineries, you need your steel plants, you need your telecommunication towers, you need your establishments. So in a small piece of land, so your oil refinery would probably be what, a couple of square kilometers by a couple of square kilometers. In that there is concentration of resources.
Mm-hmm.
If you destroy that concentration of resources, it will take maybe decades, years, if not decades, to build it back. And it would
Mm-hmm.
disrupt a lot of things. Your railway
Mm-hmm.
lines, your airports, your broadcasting stations, earlier the broadcasting stations, today your telecom networks. If you just look at these things, so even today, if we talk about war, those are the most important things. Those are the strategic installations which have to be prevented, which have to be protected. Then at the next level, you have factories. A factory is a very
Mm-hmm.
concentrated resource. If you look at it vis-a-vis agriculture, a factory is a concentrated resource. In that very small
Mm-hmm.
area, you have machines, you have set up a production system, you have done, and typically it takes a few years and a lot of capital and effort and investment to make it. If that gets destroyed, one, it does not regenerate itself very easily.
Mm-hmm.
Second, it takes a fairly long window of time and effort to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Third, most factories, so you do not have an abundance of factories. So if we have steel factories, we will have a few iron and steel factories. You will not have them dotted all over the place. So if they get destroyed, then your steel production gets hit, your downstream industries get hit. So there are a lot of what we would say maybe it triggers chain reactions, which
Mm-hmm.
is really not in the case of agriculture or cereals that you need to consume to some extent.
Mm-hmm.
So the argument, at least in one way we can look at it, is that as industrialization started, as the industrial revolution started, as industrialization started, the nature
Mm-hmm.
of war started to change, and industrial revolution and even in the early industrial era, our weapons also improved, which increased our ability to create destruction. So
Mm-hmm.
on both of these axes, our ability to create destruction, to destroy,
Mm-hmm.
and the effects of destruction. So on both
Mm-hmm.
these axes, we probably saw maybe if not multiple, at least an order change.
Mm-hmm.
As this order changed, so the your ability to destroy went up, and with the advent of gunpowder, with the advent of cannons, with the advent of maybe then in modern technology we got the artillery, and then we got the tanks, and now the aeroplanes. The amount of destruction you can cause is like many folds.
Mm-hmm.
And second, these are concentrated destructions. If you destroy it once, it probably will take, it will destroy, it will lead to larger scale of destruction.
Mm-hmm.
So we are seeing a shift, if we can call it, in terms of efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
Similarly, because of these things, the city started, because these establishments were close to people. So if somebody is wanting to destroy a factory, and they know that if they destroy this factory, it will put the other side behind, or by and these factories would be really concentrated near human establishments, because you need
Mm-hmm.
workers, you need this. So even the cities, the population, people start getting drawn into that. So we see three three axes. We see ability to destroy, the capital getting destroyed, and probably human destruction also starting to increase.
Okay. And you think that's been considered a cost?
Sorry, say that again, I didn't get you.
I'm saying the human cost.
Mhm.
You were saying that trying to limit the human cost
Hmm.
was also a decision factor, or in other
This
words,
was
what you're
also
basically
another cost that went up. Now, which cost are we trying to do,
okay.
or there is a shift away from it, could be different. Are we trying to prioritize one
Uh-huh.
cost over the other? That's a different question.
Uh-huh.
Second,
Human
it's
cost,
also,
yeah, potential human cost definitely went up.
and another angle to look at it, that the people who were actually investing in all of these things now had greater losses to make. So if the factories got destroyed,
Mm-hmm.
if the production got destroyed, they became the targets
Mm-hmm.
of it. If you were the rich landowners, this hardly any destruction could happen. War ended, the next 2 to 3 years you'll regenerate it back. So the rich class also started getting affected out of it.
Mm-hmm.
The wealthy industrialists, if we can, they are in some sense at the issue of it.
Mm-hmm.
A war happens, destruction happens, you can't pay your workers, your cycles break, your you need your supplies, you need your inventories, you need your markets are equally important, we know, because the nature of this. So you are also producing at scale. With industrial revolution, scale started to become important. Now,
Mm-hmm.
scale itself needs a lot of efficiency. If the markets, the
Mm-hmm.
structure, logistics, the transport, demand gets broken, it has again ripple effects.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So imagine these two systems. The agricultural system, wherein largely most of the people lived off the ground. Even if you destroyed, you could destroy a very small minuscule part of it. We're not talking about the
Mm-hmm.
void cities here.
Uh-huh.
And over, even if there was some destruction somewhere, over a cycle, over a season, it will regenerate back and you do it.
It would regenerate. Mm-hmm.
Visa with this kind of a model, wherein so a steel plant maybe takes 4, 5, 6 years to set up, a lot of effort, a lot of investment to set up, and in one night it's gone.
Mm-hmm.
And there are the upstream and the downstream effects of it. There is a lot of capital, there is a lot of debt, there is a lot of, okay? So these are the two contrasting figures.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe when we start looking at this as the picture, the argument we're trying to build and say is that wars, which were probably a reasonable, and maybe we are using the word efficient, fairly efficient instrument of change,
Mm-hmm.
started in some sense becoming inefficient.
Uh-huh. Makes sense.
So let's look at it in another angle. So in nature, we have predators, we have
Mm-hmm.
preys. Why do we have predators?
To keep the prey population limited.
So suppose, imagine a nature where there were no predators.
Uh-huh.
How would that system have worked?
So the cows and the deer would, the population would explode. They would probably destroy the entire vegetation.
And at the end of it, they will probably get rogered themselves because vegetation would take longer. If you overgraze, they get longer to regenerate. So what
The
you're saying
second
in
and
some sense,
third order effects would be very bad.
so what you're saying in some sense, if I paraphrase it, that the act of the predators, which is a very violent act,
Mm-hmm.
keeps the population of the prey healthy. If we imagine a
Mm-hmm.
world without predators,
Mm-hmm.
we would have come up with a very different cycle.
Uh-huh.
Hmm?
Makes sense. Makes sense. And we are saying that
And predators are the people who are helping the natural selection of the prey.
uh-huh.
Predators are the guys who lead to the natural selection of the prey.
Mm-hmm. So in a way, predators are doing what wars would eventually do when humans come around and they establish a system of monarchy.
Which is drawing seems looking at some anecdotal evidences. And today,
Uh-huh.
if we look at the animal kingdom today, effectively all the predators have vanished, except in some
Mm-hmm.
very small forest reserves. The preys have multiplied. The amount of chicken we have, or hens we have, and the cattle we have, and the goats and sheep and pigs we have is probably at the peak in terms of numbers.
Mm-hmm.
We,
And
we, we've constructed a new world in some sense. The predator prey model, which was the core model that probably was at the heart of all this structure,
mhm,
has been displaced by a fairly different model
which essentially is selective regulation of population by humans.
by humans.
By
There's
humans.
a lot by humans. There's a lot of investment going in. So
Uh-huh.
in those populations, so most of these populations are kept in captive zones.
Mm-hmm.
They're not free populations. There is a regulation of it. There is this, and we do it. And the predator
Mm-hmm.
prey cycle, if you look at the cattle population, or if you look at hen, or if you look at maybe pigs, or if you look at that, the predator prey cycle is not the driver of their core populations.
Mm-hmm.
Again, there are changes that are happening.
Uh-huh. So that obviously is a very, very different example from the context that we have been talking about.
All we're
Um
talking about is when we look at war, we look at it from one lens, which is again a very contextual lens, that violence is bad. Violence or loss of human lives, as we consider it sacred, is bad. But from a system
I think
design, if you look at it,
uh-huh.
so all we are trying to
Uh,
do is draw a distinction, and maybe you might say we're not taking a very humane view of things, but we're just
mm-hmm.
trying to see what does it mean, and which is why probably I brought this angle up of predator and prey.
I think if we look at it from the framework of first and second order effects, this
Mhm.
thing becomes very clear. War, first order effect obviously is negative, second order effect has a lot of positives. Similarly, predator, first order effect is that the deer dies. Second order effect is that probably the entire life on the earth survives.
Entire life, or maybe the deer population over 2, 3, 4, 5 generations would have disappeared. They would have overgrazed.
Mhm.
They would have done that, and
The ecosystem survives.
the ecosystem survives. There is this experiment, I think so, which happened in the United States. I forget which valley or mountains they're talking about. They introduced, I think so, a pack of 7 wolves
Mm-hmm.
into an area,
Mm-hmm.
and as they introduced the 7 wolves over, I think so, the next few years, all the grasslands became green, the river systems came back. Nature, the nature which had kind of gotten the amount of deforestation that had happened, and the meadows which had become completely bereft of any vegetation, all of them started reviving back.
Mm-hmm. Uh-huh.
So you need these elements. In some sense, you need these elements. They
You
are
need these
important.
elements.
And which is why I think so another interesting angle, and here is this, there's a very interesting angle that at least you and I talked about, wherein we said that imagine a predator, and let's look at the apex predators, maybe a lion or a tiger. Why don't they hunt for joy? In humans we see hunting for joy, for pleasure. They
Mm-hmm.
typically,
Mm-hmm.
we make an assumption, and we rarely see it in nature, at least that's what I have read, that they don't hunt for joy,
Mm-hmm.
they
Mm-hmm.
don't hunt for pleasure. Why don't they hunt for pleasure?
Uh-huh. Because if they hunt for pleasure, then the reverse thing would happen. The predators would first order effect, they'll kill all the prey, and then the second order effect would be they all will die themselves.
So effectively, we are saying that if you are over violent, or if you start
Mm-hmm.
enjoying violence,
Mm-hmm.
it leads to your own destruction.
Mm-hmm.
So this balance is very critical,
Uh-huh.
and the way this balance is also maintained. So how is this balance probably maintained in nature? So even an apex predator like a lion or a tiger has to put in a lot of effort
Mm-hmm.
to catch a prey. It
Mm-hmm.
could have been the reverse of it. It could have been that a lion could have 2x the speed the lion has today.
Mm-hmm.
What would have happened if the lion had 2x the speed it has today? The lion
Probably,
is probably,
yeah, probably evolution threw up such lions, and they would have uh, very quickly finished off all the deer and died themselves.
they would have died themselves. So here is a very, so if you look at this predator prey model, there is probably a very delicate balance at which it sets.
Mm-hmm.
The whole evolutionary or the natural selection, even more than evolutionary, the natural selection process is constructing a balance at which these things are existing.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody is defining that balance, nobody is setting it up, but we all see that balance there.
Mm-hmm.
So that balance leads a lion or of a tiger to eat as much of the prey they can eat, optimize their resources. Even though they are apex predators, they are probably the most fearsome and the most elegant, efficient animals to be created. They still need to fight for it, and the balance is created. If we come
Mm-hmm.
back to the
And
monarchical,
their hit rate would still not be 100%. Hit rate in terms of actually the number of missions, hunting missions they undertake, and the number of actual kills they get. That would be very very smaller than
much
anywhere
much
near
smaller,
peak
because as it starts to increase, you would see inefficiency. So this predator prey cycle again has a lot of efficiency built in.
efficiency built in. Mm-hmm.
So, and there is efficiency on every side. There is efficiency on the prey side if the number of predators reduce, and we know this cycle that is known as the predator prey cycle, which is typically known as that if the number of predators increase, the number of prey drop. If the number of prey drops, the number of predators drops. Obviously, food goes down. As predators go down, the prey start to live longer. They have more reproduction. Their numbers come back, and hence the predators come back, and the cycle keeps on playing out.
Mm-hmm.
So within, so it's in some sense it's a choreographed dance, which is a beautiful kind
Mm-hmm.
of a piece in a very delicate kind of a framework that's playing out.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody's doing it, but it's still there. Now we need to look at all these wars and monarchical systems in that kind of a play.
Mm-hmm.
They're getting evolved through these practices. At the extreme, if somebody extreme comes in, you try and rein them in, which is what we see in the Mahabharata. And the Mahabharata also seems to be like a choreographed piece,
Uh-huh.
a choreograph. that we see in nature also.
Mm-hmm.
And there is this chosen instrument which is efficient.
Or I think what we are really referring to by calling it choreographed is essentially the adjustments a running system does when some component of it veers towards extreme behavior. So a lot of these systems with a lot of moving parts would actually have that tendency that if some part is sort of moving towards extreme behavior, then the other parts would sort of either neutralize it or in some way solve the problem that is being caused by that extreme behavior.
In the only thing I would add need to add, so you're talking in some sense of adaptive systems.
Uh-huh.
In natural selection, the adaptation happens by death, by destruction. So if
Mm-hmm.
the lions become very powerful, they get rogered. It probably would not be that easy to pull back their genes.
Mm-hmm.
They basically become extinct. That
Mm-hmm.
tribe, that specific thing probably starts to become
Mm-hmm.
loses out. So
Mm-hmm.
so it's a very strange thing. So today we want to strive for glory, strive for greatness. You cross a threshold and you're done.
Uh-huh.
That seems to be one of the models of nature.
Mm-hmm.
Similarly, if the prey started becoming faster and faster and faster, game over. Because then
Mm-hmm.
the predator will not be able to catch you, you will overgraze, you will do all these things, and we start
Mm-hmm.
getting back to the cycles. So there are a
Uh-huh.
lot of these cycles at play. Think about the whole monarchical system as probably because there is no single unit, and we had a lot of these kingdoms and these. So there is this which is why I'm calling it as a choreographed dance with multiple players in it.
Mm-hmm.
When their
Mm-hmm.
actions start to play out, nobody is being driven by a single thought, but the tools they employ.
Look, Lokesh, I'll interrupt you here. Would you call this an anti-fragile system in Taleb's vocabulary?
No, I will not probably call it an anti-fragile system because there
Okay.
would be a lot of times wherein the solution would have been total annihilation.
Uh-huh. Because the basic concept of anti-fragile system again is essentially a system with a lot of moving parts where each
Hmm.
part has some amount of autonomy in terms of choosing its response. And
Hmm.
if that is a running system,
Hmm.
then such variations like a prey suddenly learning to run too fast or a
Hmm.
predator
So it's not
learning to
anti-fragile;
run
it's
too fast.
super fragile. That prey will get annihilated finally. That prey will not slow down.
So that prey would get annihilated, but the entire system, so that system component will might be discarded, it might be thrown out, but
Hmm.
the entire system would be saved by just killing that particular system, that
Then,
particular component.
then you're basically increasing your reference to such a large reference wherein we know the Earth has survived. Then there is probably nothing left to talk about.
Uh
What's
huh.
important is probably to look at that interaction, how it plays out,
Mm-hmm.
because then we're talking about the universal system.
Uh huh.
So one way to look at it was that maybe there were some limits that suddenly the prey speeds started to come down automatically.
Mm-hmm.
This started to happen.
Mm-hmm.
The preys were always because they trained. So like we do training today, the preys trained against the predators, and as they saw that they were outrunning the predators, they started slowing down.
Mm-hmm.
We not That's not probably the kind of the system.
Mm-hmm.
We're looking at a system which typically is also built upon a lot of regeneration.
So it is obviously not a system with like the systems that we talk about in instrumentation, that there is a system, there is an input output, If output goes beyond certain values, then there is a feedback which
There is no
loops back into
absolutely.
input, which corrects it. So
So
it is
this is
not
not
that kind
feedback,
of
or
a
this is
system.
not a feedback-based system. Largely
It's
speaking,
not
this
a
is a
feedback
system
kind
that
of a
hits the
system.
wall and then somehow figures out a way to come back from it.
Hmm.
And to a large extent, it might mean a lot of destruction.
Hmm.
And destruction, that extreme destruction, if you look at it again, is good.
Uh-huh.
So take that example of that prey. If that prey does not have localized destruction and it starts spreading all over the world, then we are probably seeing total annihilation. So it's
So
better that
I'll
that prey gets destroyed in a local
uh-huh.
context.
Hmm. I'll make another comment here. And
Hmm.
since our larger theme of conversation was centered around Ramayana and Mahabharata, one of the concepts, one of the ideas that I always had difficulty in understanding
Hmm.
was when we talk of the Trinity in Hinduism, we talk about Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesh. We always talk about how destruction is so critical to construction or to creation, and that is something that I have always sort of struggled to understand. I think this
Absolutely.
is this is one of the way we can actually see where destruction is actually a very critical component of creation. Destruction is what is making the system go on and sustain.
That destruction is
So,
in some sense a positive force.
yeah, so that is my brainwave for today. That
Maybe,
the
maybe
the, the
that's a
role of
very interesting
Shiva,
way.
the destruction. That's how we see it play.
Maybe that's a very interesting point, because the struggle you have had, I've also had the same struggle, and I think a lot of people would have had that struggle. That how do we look at it? So there is creation,
Hmm.
there is maintenance, the guy who maintains, and then there is destruction. In the predator prey cycle, or in the case of wars, we're saying that the act of destruction within the right contours, and those contours again coming out of evolutionary mechanisms,
Hmm.
is great. And if at times that evolutionary mechanism loses control of it, is not able to rein in those factors, we're probably looking at complete annihilation or complete destruction, and from where creation again starts to happen.
Like we saw in the 18-day war, complete annihilation we saw there.
I don't know how to
Mm-hmm.
correlate it with this, because that's again
Mm-hmm.
a system which did not get completely annihilated.
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
So don't know. But what we are starting to see here, and that was a very interesting point you brought out, that destruction could be very fundamental.
Mm-hmm.
Today, if we took the example of, say, cattle and hen and sheep and goat and maybe pigs today, the role of destruction is ours. So if tomorrow slaughter of pigs stops,
Mm-hmm.
we can imagine what will happen.
Mm-hmm.
And the more we control this process, the more we are able to run with it.
Uh-huh.
So
And
that's a
and
very,
we
very
are we
interesting aspect.
and we are not yet talking about the pros and cons of a predator prey system which sort of has its own auto correction mechanisms versus the human led regulated breeding, regulated population control of cattle and pigs
We're
and
talking in
hens
very, very
and chickens.
loose and in very, very generic terms here, to probably
Uh-huh.
maybe giving to seed some ideas.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, if we try and delve deep into it, there will be a lot of contradictions and a lot of issues it will throw up. But probably the discussion of the last half an hour, and as you probably summed it up very nicely with that trinity, is that things which at the surface of it, on the face of it, seem so negative,
Mm-hmm.
they would have some positive benefits. So another, if you look at natural selection, if there was no systemic value of the predators, maybe the predators should have just
Mm-hmm.
disappeared. Their evolution happened, they came up, and then there is this difference in numbers. which is again the very interesting part. The population of prey to predator is a typical maybe 100 is to 1, maybe 200 is to 1, maybe 50 is to 1. There is a the predators are very few in number relative to. So if you look at the deer population vis-a-vis say in a forest vis-a-vis say the predator or the lion or the tiger or the cheetah, which is the key predator, the population, maybe the lion population would be 1%, 2% of the deer population. So it seems like a very hierarchical framework in that sense, in terms of numbers, and that percent, 2%, and this 100% of the prey population seems to be in that framework, which works very well, which is able to handle this whole resource allocation problem fairly efficiently. If you look at the individual events, they would be bad. There is killing, there's violence, there is destruction, there is a lot of maybe heartfelt those bad things happening. You feel remorse, you feel bad, you feel this. But
So for first order versus second order model, that solves this problem for me. Obviously, killing, getting a deer killed is first order negative, but since it sustains the entire life form, the entire ecosystem, it is second order positive.
And then there is this third order effect that at some point in time, if the capabilities start moving out of range, whichever range, if the predators start to slow down, everybody dies. So if the predators start to slow down, then also the prey die. So if the prey start to slow down, the predators die. There need to be in some sense some kind of a synchronized kind of.
Dance. Yeah.
The prey can't slow down. If the prey slow down, the predators will become more. It will be easier for them to kill, and the balance effectively
would again go off balance.
The equilibrium gets disrupted, which is probably what we see in this context of this governance model and everywhere, that there is again this balance between the or the synchronization at some, and they have their zones, their ranges. You go off, and either you lead to some form of annihilation, and everybody loses out. Maybe that's one of these themes. And then within them, what are the better models? So we came up with this model, and with industrial revolution, like we are talking about, maybe we did not need this model. It became very inefficient, and we had to hunt for the alternates. And what is also important, that we needed alternates, because like we talked about earlier, if we don't build this system, then again there is a problem. So if the predators vanish, it's not great for the prey. Maybe for a generation, 2 generations, yes,
but it's not very bad for the entire ecosystem.
Utter disaster. It's really
utter disaster.
It's utter disaster. So same thing.
So should we? Yeah, please go on. I interrupted you. Please go on.
So we're saying, so probably if war became inefficient, then also we could just say no. We needed to reform or come up with another framework to get the system into balance.
The job of destruction, you're saying, needed to be somehow done by some other mechanism,
or the whole system need to now come together in a new way. So either you could replace that war piece with something else. It was replaceable, which typically it's very difficult to do. So we needed probably a new system which had all these pieces together, which was complete in its own way to come up. And maybe that's the shift we have seen.
Lokesh, this gives me a couple of very interesting pointers, and I think I'll articulate them much better in tomorrow's session. And I think I'll have an interesting piece to talk about, because this thing is suddenly giving rise to a lot of ideas, and I think if I sit for around 10-15 minutes, I'd be able to sort of articulate
Sure.
it really well. So we'll
Look
do that
forward to
tomorrow.
hearing. Look forward to it.
And so should we close here today?
Yeah, I think so. We have exceeded our time also.
All right. So good discussion. Thanks everyone. Thanks Lokesh. Let's connect tomorrow again at 9 o'clock.
Yeah.
Bye bye.
Good night. Bye.